Okay, so we are on our watercolor techniques of our visual journals. First thing you want to do today is grab a ruler and a clipboard, and you want to measure this out the same way you measured out your acrylic painting techniques. So you're going to place your ruler, you're going to mark every 2 inches on each side, and then line them up to go across, okay? So that way you should end up with a total of 8 sections. You're going to be practicing some watercolor techniques. With these, we're just going to use the simple elementary watercolor palette since we're just testing this out. I will have us use some different liquid pigments when we get to a project. So for today, you'll want the watercolor palettes. You'll want your round tip brush. You can also use your flat, smaller brush if you would like to, your size 4. Okay, so one of the first things I like to do before I begin with watercolor is make sure you have a cup of water. And I'm going to prep my palette. That means I'm going to place water in all of the colors. This allows them to start being workable so I can work a little bit faster and my techniques show up a little bit nicer. So I'm going to go ahead and drop some water into each of those colors. Okay, so your first technique is wet on wet. So this is similar to your acrylic, but of course with watercolors you'll have a little bit different effect, okay? So with wet on wet, I'm going to take my brush, I'm going to take just plain water. I'm going to soak this first rectangular space pretty well. Then I'm just going to pick one of my colors that I've already added water to, and I'm going to simply drop the color into the pre-wetted paper, and you can see it's going to expand. This is a really fun one if you want to do like a sky or sunset. Anything that you want some really fuzzy edges, but you want your colors to have a nice blending effect. Okay, so that's wet onto wet. A graded wash then is where I'm going to try and go from dark to light using a color. Okay, so with the graded wash, I'm going to go ahead. I like to use a darker color with the graded wash, so I'm going to do blue. All right, and I'm just going to start from one side, and my goal here is to have my color get lighter as I go across. So one of the ways I do that is I'm going to wash out my brush when I'm about halfway and then go back in with my brush. So now it's cleaner, so I have less pigment on it, so I can pull the remaining color across. Okay. I always like to try and go for a nice contrast, so I'm going to add a little bit more pigment to the darker part of my graded wash here. You might need a paper towel to just kind of dry off your brush as you're going back and forth here. Okay. And then I take the tip of the brush and I'm just going to pull that pigment across so it flows, but I can get a nice dark to light value change here. Okay, and like I said, I think with this one, a darker color is easier for you to be successful with. Okay, so there is graded wash. The next one is lift and blot. And for this one, you might need a paper towel. And my goal here is to place some pigment down, and then I'm going to pull it away with a paper towel. Okay, so again with this one, I would say a darker color works best. So I'm just going to take a nicely soaked pigment and place down some color. Okay, you have to do this sort of quickly. Then you're going to take your paper towel, press, pull up, and as long as your paper is still wet, like I said, you do have to do it sort of quickly, it's going to pull away a lot of that pigment. And this is a nice way to make a cloud effect, kind of an eerie, ghostly effect, because you still have a little bit of that initial color, but it's obviously been pulled away. This is a fun technique if you're trying to just figure out a way to start a painting. You can always place a ground and then pull away different areas and then see what develops, see what speaks to you. Okay, so this one, next one is the salt. So there will be some containers of salt out for you. And then what you're going to do is, again, place a nice ground, making sure your color has a lot of water in it. Okay. Working sort of fast here. Then I'm going to take the little salt container. I'm just going to use a very small pinch. Please don't use much. It just becomes kind of annoying and you get a lot of salt everywhere if you do that. But I'm just going to take a small pinch and sprinkle it onto the red watercolor. And you can see what it starts to do is it starts to attract the color the pigment away from the water. And then once it dries, we can brush away the salt and you get a nice sort of white splotchy effect. Again, good for snow or atmospheric effects. Scumbling is again very similar to what you did with the acrylics, okay? With scumbling with watercolor, you have a little more of a blending effect happen just because they tend to want to blend more since they're very liquid. So I'm going to just take a color, dot it, create a ground. Then I'm going to take another color that I would like. I usually like to use neighbor colors, so for this one I'm going to use the neighbor color of green and stamp it over top of my blue. Okay. Again, similar effect, but you can see the result is slightly different because we're using a different material this time. Okay. Scrape, same as your acrylic. Again, I think a darker color works best here. Okay, so I'm going to lay down a nice dark ground. Very quickly, as that is still wet, I'm going to take a end of a paintbrush and scratch into there. This works really good if you're trying to make like a lagoon with like cattails or something. I'm kind of showing you there, you can actually pull the pigment out beyond the edge of the ground too. So like if this were trying to be like a little cattail scene or like something like that, it's a nice way to get a ground and then work the color through. Okay. Stamp technique, this one might be fun to try more than one brush. Again, just testing out how the different materials work. So I have your straight edge size 4 thin brush here, and I'm just going to stamp and pull away. Sure, you can think of a lot of nice things you could do with this. Maybe shingles on a roof is my first thought. Footsteps, maybe some sort of like a path. And then of course each brush is going to give you a slightly different mark. I like the round tip one for like leaves or something in a tree. So think as you're making these, what could I use this for? Okay, all right, and then we're on to our last one, which is just a solid wash. Okay, so like let's say we wanted to make a night scene or something. One of the first things that you often do with watercolor is just create a wash over your sketch to give you a nice ground to build up other pigments on top of. Okay, so we're just gonna fill that up evenly with one pigment choice. Okay, all right, that's it for today. Thank you.